Looking at these crowds and flags gathered at the Capitol, it's easy to assume American political division is a sign of a failing system, but this fracture may actually be the nation's intended operating system. Long before 1776, this land was already a complex mosaic of over 600 sovereign Native American nations. They maintained advanced systems of trade, diplomacy, and governance that had existed for thousands of years. Early British colonization deepened these regional divides. Massachusetts merchants often viewed Southern rice planters as lazy aristocrats, while Southerners saw New Englanders as meddling fanatics. This friction was so intense that in 1754, every single colonial assembly flatly rejected a proposal to form a unified government for shared defense. That isolation only began to erode when the British Empire accrued £122 million in debt defending these territories. To pay just the interest on that debt, London demanded a financial return from the colonies. The colonists were perfectly content living as separate, isolated subjects of the crown. It took the sudden pressure of global debt and new taxes to force these regional rivals to communicate with each other. This sheet shows the red one-penny stamps used to enforce the 1765 Stamp Act. This was the first time London bypassed local assemblies to tax the colonists directly on every legal document and newspaper they used. The implementation of this tax forced a focus on a single grievance: the lack of colonial representation in the Parliament setting the rates. This specific ideological argument began bridging the deep divide between the different colonies. Britain responded to the ensuing protests with the Intolerable Acts, blockading Boston Harbor and suspending Massachusetts' right to self-government. By attempting to isolate and punish Massachusetts, Britain accidentally forged the colonial unity it feared. The other colonies rallied to provide aid, laying the groundwork for a coordinated continental response. The violence at Lexington and Concord was a desperate, localized affair. The people in the smoke were local farmers and shopkeepers, not a professional military. The Continental Congress realized that a rebellion confined to New England would be crushed. To survive, they had to transform a regional riot into a national cause that the wealthy Southern colonies would support. They achieved this through a strategic choice, appointing George Washington, an elite Virginian planter, to take command of the radical Northern militias. Selecting Washington was the first major political compromise of the American experiment. It ensured that Southern money and Northern anger were permanently bound together in a single army. The Continental Army lived in these rustic log cabins, perpetually short on food, shoes, and gunpowder. For years, the survival of the Revolution depended on an army that was always on the verge of disappearing. Washington's strategy focused on avoiding a decisive, catastrophic defeat. By keeping his army intact through retreats and stalemates, he intended to simply outlast the British government's political will to continue the war. This strategy reached its conclusion at Yorktown, where a trapped British force surrendered to American and French troops, effectively ending major combat operations. This document is the final page of the 1783 Treaty of Paris. The red wax seals mark the moment Britain officially recognized American independence and ceded territory stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. After the victory, Washington performed his most radical act. Instead of using his military power to become a dictator, he walked into a small room in Maryland and resigned his commission to Congress. Winning the war merely cleared the geopolitical space to try building a nation. The hard part, figuring out how 13 different states could actually function together, was just beginning. The first attempt at government, the Articles of Confederation, failed immediately. The federal government could not levy taxes or enforce national laws, leaving the states to fight over trade and money. Delegates gathered in Philadelphia to scrap the old system and draft the United States Constitution. They needed a stronger framework to prevent the new nation from collapsing. This document contains a tragic moral contradiction. The legal text enshrines the rhetoric of liberty while simultaneously creating protections for the institution of slavery to keep the Southern states at the table. The Constitution established an agreed-upon set of rules for engagement. It provided a framework for managing the inevitable, ongoing disagreements that were already baked into the American foundation. When the constitutional framework could no longer contain the argument over slavery, The system broke. The resulting Civil War became the bloodiest chapter in the nation's history. The argument broadened in the 20th century as women organized and marched to demand their fundamental right to participate in the democratic process. The civil rights movement took up the same argument, forcing the nation to confront the promises of equality it had made but failed to fulfill. Leaders and citizens utilized the First Amendment to march against segregation, demanding that the democratic process include all Americans regardless of race. Into the 21st century, existential threats like the September 11th attacks continue to test the resilience and the unity of the American experiment. America remains an unfinished argument. Modern political upheavals and fierce debates act as the mechanism of a living democracy, pushing the country to resolve its founding contradictions through